Hey everyone, welcome to another Screenwriting Tips. My name is Tony D. If you haven't seen my almost 1 hour video on my breakdown of Captain Marvel, see the previous video. If you're watching this on Daily Motion, the video was too big to upload into my account, so you have to go to BitChute or YouTube or the website where I post all the videos, which is currently at Superfrat, the Superfrat blog. Superfrat's a web comic, and I like to do blog posts during the week. It updates on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the comic, and then the rest of the week I do videos or I do funny stuff, and recently I've been getting into the videos. It's my birthday, so it's going to be a short video because I got stuff to do, and birthday stuff is happening every year. I invite all my fans to celebrate my birthday week with me. The typical traditional ways of celebrating my birthday include eating sushi and playing video games. So any of those things, or making comics. Making comics is always a good thing. So today's screenwriting tips is going to be how to write smarter. Okay? So a couple of tips. And some of these I've said before in other videos, but they're pretty straightforward. You want to do the smart things. So what's the first smart thing you should do? Always do your research. So if you're doing a video or a movie, a screenplay about, I don't know, the newspaper industry, you're going to want to see movies about the newspaper industry because you need to know what's gone before. Also, you want to do research into newspapers and how they work and what the famous ones were and who worked on them and some of the famous figures and all that good stuff. So, do your research. Numero uno. Number two, you want to always not reinvent the wheel. And what I mean by that is part of the reason you see these other movies is not to just get an idea of how a movie like that plays out, but to not do what they did, to see how they did it and then do something else, do something better, do something bigger, do something, something they missed or left out. There's all sorts of ways to do that. To keep this video short, I can't get into them all, but I just did the Captain Marvel breakdown. Superhero movies, you have to do something different now. There's been like a huge spate of Marvel movies. They've done it. Now you have to do something different. You can't just say, well, I'm going to do a movie like Thor and then basically rewrite Thor. That doesn't work. You can't set out to do a mafia movie and just reinvent The Godfather. You have to do something different. You have to kick it up a notch. It's fine to have a pitch like this is The Godfather meets something weird or something that's never been meshed with The Godfather. For instance, there was that mafia vampire movie John Landis did. Forget the name of it. Gosh, it's been a long time. But that was an example. It was a different kind of movie. It was mafia and vampires together. Hadn't been done, to my knowledge. So that's the kind of, you don't have to be so blatant with mixing it up, but you do have to distinguish your movie from all the other movies and all the other screenplays out there. Number three, and this is a big one for me, and it's something that I learned in improv. Play all your characters at the height of their intelligence. And this is one that really hurts a lot of rookie screenwriters. If you look at a scene with a character and an obstacle with that character, and you can see the obvious solution, you have to address it. Either there has to be a reason the obvious solution won't work, or the character should just do the most obvious thing. Because, using the excuse, he's not that smart. That's lame. Because the audience is. I guarantee you about that. The audience is able to sit back and relax and watch these events from the outside, so it gives them a better perspective than the character. Now, you could have a situation where the character's rushed or he's You know, he's distracted because of various reasons. I mean, there are ways to make it work, but normally you have to play the characters at the height of their intelligence, because what it forces you to do, it forces you to come up with that new thing, right? So, let me think if I can think of a quick example here. If you have a character that, let's say, has to break down a door, okay? Now, we've seen that a million times in movies. In some movies, they just break it down. It's not a problem. You know, a guy like The Rock, you can realistically see the guy kicking down the door. He's so big and he's so strong. The door is just matchsticks. Other movies, you know, more comedy movies, that ain't happening. They try to, you know, elbow a door in, and it's just way too heavy. So you have to address that like you would. That's the way I do it a lot of times. I say to myself, well, how would I break into a place if I had to kick in a door, right? So you think about the obvious things. Like, the obvious things are, well, I'd give it a couple of kicks right at the door, you know, right on the door, but where the doorknob is, because that's the point of contention with the doorknob, the lock. It's where it's holding everything. I'd give that a few kicks. If that didn't go in, or I didn't see any damage, you know, it's not happening. And it may be the way you play out that scene, right? So you might have a situation where there's no way the character can kick in the lock, let's say, but the actual door is kind of weak, and when he kicks on it, you know, the piece of the door with the lock stays in, but the rest of the door breaks off. But you also have to look at your character and whether or not they're strong enough to do that. And if they're not strong enough to do that, you have to come up with another reason how they get through this door. Maybe the door's open for some reason, but that's, you know, another thing you'd have to address with other characters. Why would they leave the door open? Why would an apartment door be opened in New York, let's say? It just wouldn't normally be doing, just normally wouldn't do that. So you'd have to come up with another reason. So I had a character in one scene in a book where he was terrible at picking locks, and he tries to pick a lock with a credit card, and he ends up dropping it into the apartment, and now he really has to get in there. And so he ends up climbing out on the balcony and stepping over the balcony, and that's how he gets in. That's a way somebody can get into an apartment, you know, without breaking down the door. And it makes sense. It made sense with my character, and it was a way to use his skills to get into a place where he didn't belong. So you have to do that too. You have to play characters at the height of their intelligence. Okay, what else? If you're in, let's say, Act 2, and you're escalating the situation, and you solve the problem too early, then you have to look at that and realize that maybe your characters don't have enough obstacles in the way. If it's the opposite problem, like they're not solving the problem at all, and then you get to Act 3 and it's like, there's no way these people could solve this problem. You have a different situation on your hands. You have a situation where maybe the obstacle's too big. Maybe you set something up in the beginning. Most problems in screenplays can be solved in the first act, because the first act lays the groundwork for all the payoffs in the other acts. So if you're having problems with your screenplay and you're reading through it, it's not working, the act you really want to focus on is that first act and where you went wrong then. Because everything springs out from that organically. The events in Act 1 are going to set the stage for 2 and 3. So you want these events to happen organically. If they're not happening organically, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. And as I said in my Captain Marvel review, there were a lot of problems with it. Things just didn't happen in the most organic way possible. And there's also one of my favorite new words is optics, because I watch a lot of political videos. But there are also optics in a movie. So the optics in Captain Marvel, and I hate to harp on Captain Marvel, but it's fresh in my mind. The optics, there's one bit in the movie where the optics really hurt it, and that is this. They show spaceships flying all over the universe using these like little portal jumpy things, and what they are is they're like a six-sided shape that forms, and like it opens up and the ship goes through it, and boom, they're in another part of the universe. So it's like, I don't know, some kind of wormhole technology, whatever they're doing. They never really explain it, of course. However, all the ships in the movie do that, except when Jude Law's character has to get to Earth, and then suddenly it's like, well, we won't be there for 22 hours. But the rest of the movie, all the ships just boom, boom, they jet right to the place they need to be and start killing people and doing whatever they do. Now, there could be a perfectly valid explanation for that. The movie people didn't bother with it, so there's the problem. The problem is the optics. So if I see spaceships in a movie jumping all over the place and they instantly get to planets, why do suddenly, at an important part of the movie, it takes a lot of time? You have to address that. Because they didn't address that in Captain Marvel, the optics look bad on space travel. I don't know what's going on. I don't know the scale. And that was my major criticism in Captain Marvel. The scale of the superpowers. There's no context for that. So when you're dealing with superpowers, in this case, superpowers in space travel, you have to address that. How strong is Captain Marvel? You got to give us some sort of gauge. What are the limits of her powers? You know, you don't have to get into every little nerdy detail, but you have to give us some gauge. Some gauge. You have to compare her to something else in the movie, whatever it is. You know, with the Hulk, and in the Hulk movies, the gauge is that a lot of times the Hulk gets captured and then he breaks his bonds because he gets so angry, he eventually just breaks it. But, you know, the Hulk, despite his amazing strength, he has limitations. He's just super angry. He's not very smart. He doesn't necessarily fight smart. He fights like a caveman. So there are limitations on him. And your characters should have some kind of weakness or limitation. You know, and that should be evident in the movie. And the main thing with screenplays is everything in the screenplay needs to drive the story forward. You only have 90 minutes to 2 hours. This is not a novel. It's a movie. You only got that amount of time. And everything has to move forward. Everything. If there's something in the movie that doesn't move the plot forward, why is it there? You have to ask yourself, why do I have the scene there? You know, if the answer is, well, I just wanted to do this, that's not really the answer. You know? Again, with Captain Marvel, there's a lot of things in it that they're just superfluous. The fact that it takes place in the 90s, it's almost superfluous to the movie. It could have taken place, they could have written it a different way where she shows up later. I understand why they put her in the past. They're trying to give the character a history that validates her with all the rest of the Avengers who are already well established, but it doesn't work for a lot of reasons, which, again, go watch my video, but the previous longer video, if you want to get into that. But you need that, you know, you need to have a sensible plan for your movie. And a lot of times what will happen is when you get to the end of the screenplay, you're going to need to set it aside, let it gel a little bit, and then come back to it like a week or two later with fresh eyes, and then you're going to go back and you're going to really tweak the first act so that the second and third acts play out in a way that makes sense. Everything has to make sense. You know, it's very rare. Now I know somebody's going to say, oh, movies don't always make sense. There's all this movie or that movie. Look, yes, there are movies in which things happen because certain directors or writers or whomever make certain creative choices. You know, David Lynch is an example where he makes movies that are very weird. But there has to be an internal logic that you follow. Once you set up that logic, if you break your own logic, if you break your own rules of physics, you're dead. You're done. the audience will be infuriated if you do stuff like that. It infuriates the hell out of me, that's for sure. So when you set up rules, if you break them, you better have a good reason. And you better explain it to the audience. But normally you set up these rules for a specific reason. So for instance, vampires have rules, right? They can't go out in the sunlight. They get killed if you stab them with a wooden stake. They drink blood. They're only active at night. All these things. Those are the rules of vampires. If you do a vampire movie, you have to adhere to those rules. If you don't, you have to explain to the audience why. Or you have to explain which rules are relevant in your particular vampire movie. Same thing's true with any other movie. You know, if you're doing a drama, that's just a straight up drama, the rules are simple. It's reality, it's a drama that takes place in our reality. Present day, you know the rules. You already know the rules of present day reality. If you change those rules even a slight bit, you must tell the audience. You can't just do it. Because the audience will be like, what the hell, man? Audiences are smarter than you give them credit for. You know, yes, there are stupid people who go see movies and they don't really pay attention or whatever, but you have to put things in to telegraph. Now, you don't have to be blatant about it. You can be subtle. You can be nuanced. But they have to be in there. You know, I've seen movies where I came out going, that was all messed up. And then later I read about the movie and realized they either tuned out during a scene or just missed something that really tied it all in together. You know, sometimes that happens. You can be too nuanced. That's more of a director's problem, you know, if he wants to be that nuanced. You know, David Lynch, I think, sometimes gets too esoteric. Some people, they try to get pretentious and esoteric just for the sake of doing that because it feels smarter than it really is. That kind of stuff you're not going to have much control over. But as the writer, you need to think this stuff out. And when I say think it out, you know, that's what writers do. They actually type the words, but they also sit down and they think. And lastly, my last tip for today, because I got to wrap this up, I really recommend that after you write scenes, or while you're writing the scenes, you should read the dialogue aloud. That's helped me tremendously. Now, some of you out there might say, I'm not an actor, I can't really do that, whatever. It's not that hard. You don't have to be an actor. And the reason you're reading the words out loud is, first off, it helps you, you know, in terms of spelling. If you miss something and you're reading it, sometimes you'll see it right then. But the big reason is, you know, for an actor to say your words, sometimes if you say the words in your head sound amazing, but then when you actually, you know, make the sounds, you realize that the words kind of don't work, you know, and you need to just tweak the dialogue just a little to make it sound more natural. For instance, there's a rule in screenwriting. You shouldn't name the characters similar names, right? So you shouldn't have, you know, a group of characters. You shouldn't have one named John and one named Joan and one named Joe. John, Joan, Joe, those names are too similar sounding. You know, obviously if you're doing some kind of historical thing and that just happens to be the names of the characters, you might not be able to get around that. But if you're doing a work of fiction, you totally have control of the names. Make them different sounding names. Make them extremely different sounding names. So have John, Dutton, Alistair, right? Because that's one syllable, two syllable, three syllable. They all start with different letters. They all sound differently. Now that doesn't mean you have to go, you know, way off the map and make, you know, if they're from a similar region, they should have similar ethnic names. If they're all similar, you know, if you're doing a story about the Irish Mafia, they should have names like, you know, Joseph, Paddy, you know, names like that that are Irish sounding names. But you know, you gotta make sure that everything in your screenplay is clear, not just to you, but to the person reading it. And by reading it aloud, it will force you to make things clear. even just reading some of your scene description, well, you'll realize sometimes, and I've done this, I wrote these sentences, 2 of them don't make sense. What the hell was I thinking? I don't know. Maybe you zoned out and left out an important word, and then you reread it and you go, oh, okay, that's what I meant. You might know what you meant and then not communicate it clearly in your screenplay. By reading every word aloud, it is a sort of a double check for you. Plus, it doesn't hurt to have a screenplay that reads easy. So if you can jazz it up a little bit, make it, you don't have to use grammatically correct sentences anywhere in your script. You don't. It's not a novel. It is a screenplay. It's about instructions on how to craft a movie. Sentence fragments can be everywhere. Look at Shane Black's scripts. He's classic for that. His scene descriptions, man, they just sing. You read his scripts and they're, I know it's hard to read screenplays, but you read Shane Black's scripts. They're the easiest ones you're going to read because he really knew how to write screenplays so that people would have the least amount of work reading them. Now, it's still true that it's very hard to read screenplays, but you want to give them the best opportunity to read it, and reading your stuff aloud will definitely help you. So that's my tips for today. I'm going to do birthday stuff, so write well, write smart, and remember, do your research, height of the intelligence, don't reinvent the wheel, and what I just said. I'm Tony D, and we'll see you next time.